go back to the transplant example, question for you: what does the utilitarian, or indeed the consequentialist, it doesn't really matter much how you define the best consequence, say in this case? According to the utilitarian, what should you do? Cut up Jones or not? Please press K. That was not too difficult. The happiness of 5 people is greater than the happiness of 1 person. 5 people being happy is a better consequence than 1 person being happy. So, according to the utilitarian, you should cut up Jones. Now, offhand, that doesn't seem to be the right result. So examples like this one are often used as objections to utilitarianism. Utilitarianism, despite its initial appeal, it can seem completely obvious when you first see it, is in fact wrong. We need another moral theory. And the one that O'Neill prefers is drawn from Kant. Kant's moral philosophy is actually very difficult, and we're only going to skim the surface of it in this course. Long graduate seminars have been given solely on this topic. If you're interested, there's an excerpt from Kant's most famous work in moral philosophy, The Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals, in the Norton Anthology. It's in chapter 16. That is entirely optional reading, though. So what is the basic idea? Kant's approach doesn't focus on the consequences of actions, but rather on the actions themselves. The rough idea is that the right action is the action that conforms to certain principles, or, as Kant says, maxims, namely those maxims or principles that treat other people as, in Kant's phrase, ends in themselves, as rational, autonomous beings deserving of equal respect. And Kant thought there was a supreme principle which would tell us which more specific principles were in accord with morality. He called that the categorical imperative. Here's one formulation of it, which O'Neill mentions. Act in such a way that you always treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never simply as a means, but always at the same time as an end. An example of treating someone simply as a means is when you deceive them or coerce them. If you obtain their rational consent, then you're not treating them simply as a means. So that's one formulation of Kant's categorical imperative. He gave 3 more. Unfortunately, it's not clear that they're all equivalent to each other. Here is another version. Act only in accordance with that maxim, through which you can at the same time will that it become a universal law. Well, that's not very easy to understand. Here is an example drawn from Kant himself. Promising. According to the utilitarian, breaking a promise is sometimes the right action. Suppose I borrow your phone and promise to return it. Having your phone may give me a huge amount of pleasure or happiness, much more pleasure or happiness than you get from having your phone. If that's so, then, according to the utilitarian, I ought to break my promise. I ought to keep your phone, because that's the way to maximize happiness. So, according to the utilitarian, breaking a promise is sometimes the right action. According to Kant, that's wrong. Why is that? Well, the utilitarian is, in effect, saying, act according to this maxim. Break a promise when doing so would maximize happiness. And that, according to Kant, could not coherently be a universal law, because if everyone acted on that maxim, no one would trust each other to keep a promise, and so the institution of promising would not exist. Okay, that may or may not be convincing, but that's the basic idea. Okay, finally, then, the $3,373 question: can a Kantian resist Singer's moderate principle? Right, just to remind you, the moderate principle is, if it is in your power to prevent something very bad from happening without sacrificing anything of moral significance, perhaps sacrificing your ownership of the new iPhone, but not sacrificing anyone's life or limbs, then you ought to do it. That's Singer's moderate principle, and that seems to be the only principle he requires for his argument. Now, O'Neill does not explicitly address the moderate principle in her essay. The crucial question is, does that essay contain the materials to resist it? We will have to leave these tricky issues for you to decide. That's the end of lectures for this week. The MIT Philosophy Club is meeting this Thursday from 6 to 7 p.m. I'll put the Zoom link in the slides. Next week, we're going to take a step back and look at morality from the outside. Are moral facts just out there waiting for us to discover them, much like the astronomical facts? Or is morality nothing more than a primitive superstition, bearing no more relation to reality than homeopathy or astrology? See you next week.